I was in my small workshop in Denver, Colorado, the scent of sawdust and varnish thick in the air, when my phone, lying face down on my workbench, vibrated insistently. A message notification from a number I didn't recognize lit up the screen. My stomach did a little flip. Usually, unknown numbers meant telemarketers or, even worse, someone trying to scam me out of my non-existent fortune. I wiped my hands on my worn leather apron and reluctantly picked it up. The message was short and to the point. Ethan, it's your mom, Susan. Grandpa Henry passed away last night. We need to talk. Can you call me? Susan. My mom. It had been 8 years. 8 years since I'd last heard her voice, since I'd last seen any of them. A lump formed in my throat. Grandpa Henry. He was Grandpa Henry. Gruff, opinionated, but with a soft spot for me, I always thought. Or maybe that was just the selective memory of a kid who desperately wanted his family's approval. I stared out the dusty window at the crisp autumn leaves swirling in the Denver breeze. Thanksgiving was just around the corner, a holiday that had become just another quiet day for me in recent years. Now this death, the great unifier, I guess, or maybe just the great manipulator. My workshop, usually my sanctuary, filled with the comforting chaos of half-finished furniture and the tools of my trade, suddenly felt cold, sterile. I'd built this life for myself, piece by painstaking piece, after everything. And now, a simple text message threatened to unravel it all. I sighed, the sound heavy in the quiet room. What did they want? Why now? After all this time, why reach out? And why through a text? Couldn't my own mother even bring herself to call? My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 35 years old, a custom furniture maker living a relatively quiet life in Denver. I share my small house with my rescue dog, a goofy golden retriever named Gus, who's currently snoring softly in his favorite sunbeam. Life isn't glamorous, but it's mine. I work hard, I love what I do, and for the most part, I'm content. It's a contentment that was hard-won, forged in the fires of a family drama I'd rather leave buried. Last year, I'd finally started seeing someone, a woman named Clara. She was a librarian, quiet and smart with a dry wit that always made me laugh. Things were getting serious in that comfortable, slow-burn kind of way. I hadn't told her much about my family. It was a topic I avoided like a root canal. Now this might change things. I finally dialed the number. It rang twice before a familiar, albeit slightly strained, voice answered. Ethan? Is that you? Yeah, Mom. I got your text. I'm sorry to hear about Grandpa. The words felt inadequate, hollow. I hadn't seen Grandpa Henry in 8 years either. There was a pause on the other end, a beat of silence that felt heavy with unspoken words. Thank you, honey. It was unexpected. He went peacefully in his sleep. Right? I said, not knowing what else to say. We're all here in Charlotte. For the funeral. It's on Wednesday. Charlotte, I repeated. That was where they all were. My parents, my older sister, Sarah, and my younger brother, Ben. The perfect suburban family, or at least they liked to pretend they were. Yes, and, well, there's something else. Her voice dropped, becoming hesitant. Grandpa's will. I braced myself. Here it comes. What about it? He left a significant portion of his estate to you, Ethan. My jaw dropped. Me? Grandpa Henry? Of all people. My parents had always been the golden children, the ones who towed the line and played the part. I was the black sheep, the one who dared to have his own opinions, his own life. Are you serious? I asked, disbelief lacing my voice. Yes, it was quite a shock to all of us. I could practically hear the unspoken resentment in her tone. So, that's why you're calling? I couldn't help the cynical edge in my voice. No, Ethan. Of course not. We wanted to let you know. And, well, Grandpa's lawyer mentioned there's a reading of the will on Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. Here in Charlotte. Thanksgiving. Of course. They always had their big, picture-perfect Thanksgiving dinners. The ones I hadn't been invited to for 8 years. And you want me to come? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. We think it would be best for everyone to be there. It's what Grandpa would have wanted." I snorted softly. They hadn't given a damn about what Grandpa wanted for the past 8 years. Not when it came to me. I'll think about it, Mom," I said, the familiar urge to shut them out rising within me. "Please, Ethan, just consider it. It would mean a lot to your father and me, and to Sarah and Ben." I doubted that. Sarah had always been fiercely loyal to my parents, and Ben mostly just went along with whatever Sarah said. "I'll let you know," I said, and ended the call. I stood there for a long moment, the phone heavy in my hand. 8 years. 8 years of silence, of being cut off, of feeling like I didn't exist in their world. And now, suddenly, I was family again. Because of money. It was always about money with them. To understand why this call felt like a punch to the gut, I need to rewind a bit. My family, the Millers of Charlotte, North Carolina, were the epitome of upper-middle-class respectability. My dad, Richard, was a successful lawyer, always impeccably dressed and concerned with appearances. My mom, Susan, was a homemaker, active in various charity organizations, and obsessed with maintaining the facade of a perfect family. Sarah, my older sister, was the golden child, valedictorian of her high school class, now a doctor with a handsome lawyer husband and 2 perfect children. Ben, my younger brother, Ben was always a bit lost, drifting from one job to another, always trying to please everyone. And then there was me, the artist, the one who didn't quite fit. From a young age, I was drawn to creating things with my hands. While Sarah was acing her exams and Ben was playing sports, I was in the garage, tinkering with wood, building things. My parents tolerated it as a hobby, something I'd eventually grow out of. But it never went away. It was who I was. The real trouble started when I was 27. I just finished my apprenticeship as a furniture maker and was starting to build my own small business. My parents, of course, had other plans for me. They expected me to go to college, get a real job, maybe even join my dad's law firm. When I told them I was going to pursue woodworking full-time, they were less than thrilled. "You're throwing your life away, Ethan," my dad had said, his voice tight with disapproval. This isn't a career. It's a hobby. It's my passion, Dad," I'd argued. "I love it, and I can make a living doing this." "A meager one," my mom had chimed in, her face etched with disappointment. "We raised you better than this." The arguments escalated, becoming more frequent and more heated. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't follow the path they had laid out for me. They saw my passion as a personal affront, a rejection of their values. Sarah and Ben mostly stayed out of it, though I could sense their disapproval as well. Then came the incident with the money. My grandparents on my mother's side had passed away, leaving a small inheritance to their grandchildren. My share wasn't huge, but it was enough to help me get my fledgling business off the ground. When I told my parents I was going to use it to buy some much-needed equipment, they hit the roof. "That money is for your future, Ethan," my dad had insisted. "For something stable, not for some woodworking fantasy." "It is my future," I'd retorted. "And it's my money. I get to decide what to do with it." That was the last straw. My dad had exploded, saying things I don't even remember now, things that cut deep and left scars. My mom had cried, accusing me of being selfish and ungrateful. Sarah had shaken her head, her eyes filled with pity. Ben had just looked uncomfortable and mumbled something about hoping we could all get along. The next day I received a letter. It was from my parents. They said they were deeply disappointed in my choices, that they couldn't support my foolish endeavors any longer. They were cutting me off financially, and they needed some time apart. They suggested I move out of the small apartment I was renting above their garage. Felt like a punch to the gut. I was 27 years old, and my own parents were disowning me because I wanted to pursue my passion. Sarah and Ben didn't reach out. They sided with my parents, as always. I packed my things, loaded them into my beat-up pickup truck, and drove away from Charlotte. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I ended up in Denver, drawn by the mountains and the promise of a fresh start. The first few years were tough. I worked odd jobs, saved every penny, and slowly built my workshop. There were times I doubted myself, times I wondered if my parents were right, if I was throwing my life away. But then I'd run my hand over the smooth grain of a piece of wood, feel the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and functional, and I knew I was on the right path. I hadn't spoken to my family in 8 years. No calls, no emails, no birthday cards. Nothing. It was as if I had ceased to exist in their world. And honestly, for the most part, I was okay with that. I had built a life without them, a life I was proud of. But now, Grandpa Henry's death, and this unexpected inheritance, had thrown a wrench in the works. They wanted me back. Not because they missed me, not because they regretted their actions, but because of money. It was always about money. I looked at my phone again, the message from my mom still on the screen. Grandpa Henry passed away last night. We need to talk. Can you call me? A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Sadness for Grandpa, anger at my parents, confusion about the inheritance, and a deep-seated fear of being sucked back into their toxic world. Gus, sensing my unease, nudged my hand with his wet nose. I knelt down and scratched behind his ears. "What do you think, boy?" I murmured. "Should we go back to the circus?" He just wagged his tail, oblivious to the turmoil in my head. I needed to talk to someone. Clara. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, her voice warm and concerned. "Not really," I admitted. My grandfather passed away." "Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry." "Thanks. And my mom called." "Well, texted. It's been 8 years since I've heard from them." There was a pause. "Wow, that's a long time." "Yeah. And apparently my grandfather left me something in his will. They want me to come back to Charlotte for the funeral and the reading of the will." "What are you going to do?" I sighed. "I don't know. Part of me wants to tell them to stick their inheritance where the sun doesn't shine. But Grandpa was always different. Maybe I owe it to him to go." "You don't owe them anything, Ethan," Clara said firmly. "But if you want to go, I'll support you. Just be careful." "I will," I promised. "Thanks, Clara. Just talking to you helps." "Anytime. Let me know what you decide." I hung up the phone feeling slightly better, but the knot in my stomach was still there. I spent the rest of the day in my workshop, trying to focus on the piece of furniture I was working on, a custom dining table for a client. The rhythmic sanding and the familiar scent of the wood usually calmed me, but today, my mind kept drifting back to Charlotte, to my family, to the 8 years of silence. By the end of the day, I still hadn't made a decision. Part of me longed for some kind of reconciliation, a chance to finally be accepted by my family. But the other part, the bigger part, was terrified of being hurt again, of being reminded that I was never good enough for them. That night, I lay in bed, Gus curled up at my feet, staring at the ceiling. Thanksgiving was just a few days away. Should I go back to Charlotte? Should I face the family I had tried so hard to forget? And what exactly did Grandpa Henry leave me? The suspense was a heavy weight in my chest. I tossed and turned, the ghosts of my past swirling around me, the silence of the last 8 years suddenly deafening. The question hung in the air, unanswered, a dark cloud looming over the already complicated holiday. What awaited me in Charlotte? And could I handle the fallout? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of grim determination. I was going to Charlotte. Not for my parents, not for Sarah or Ben, and certainly not because of any potential inheritance. I was going for Grandpa Henry. Whatever his reasons for leaving me something, I owed him at least that much. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally get some answers, some closure on the whole damn mess. I called my mom back and told her I'd be there for the funeral on Wednesday. Her voice was surprisingly subdued, almost relieved. It made me even more suspicious. The flight to Charlotte felt long and dreary. As the plane descended, I looked out the window at the familiar landscape, the sprawling suburbs and the tree-lined streets I'd once called home. A strange mix of nostalgia and resentment churned in my gut. My brother, Ben, picked me up from the airport. He'd put on a few pounds and his hairline was receding slightly, but he was still the same old Ben, eager to please and slightly awkward. The drive to their house was filled with stilted conversation about the weather and my work. He didn't mention the will, and neither did I. The atmosphere at my parents' house was thick with unspoken tension. Sarah was there with her husband, Mark, and their 2 kids, who I barely recognized. My parents greeted me with forced politeness, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. It was like we were all actors in a poorly rehearsed play, trying to remember our lines after years of being offstage. The funeral was a blur of hushed voices, black clothing, and forced solemnity. I stood with my family, feeling like an outsider looking in. Grandpa Henry's eulogy was delivered by a family friend, painting a picture of a kind and generous man. I tried to reconcile that image with the gruff, sometimes distant grandfather I remembered, but it was hard. After the service, there was a reception at my parents' house. It was the kind of gathering they always excelled at: perfect canapés, polite small talk, and an underlying current of judgment and competition. Sarah's kids were impeccably behaved. Mark made all the right lawyer jokes, and my parents circulated, playing the grieving hosts. Ben mostly hovered in the corner, looking uncomfortable. I found myself cornered by Sarah. "So," she said, her tone carefully neutral, "it's been a while." "Yeah," I replied, taking a sip of my lukewarm coffee. 8 years, give or take. "A lot has changed," she said, glancing pointedly at my worn jeans and the fact that I hadn't brought a plus one. "Some things never do," I countered, meeting her gaze. She sighed. "Look, Ethan, about everything that happened a long time ago. Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "We don't need to do this now, Sarah." She nodded, a flicker of relief in her eyes. "Okay, but maybe sometime." "Maybe," I said, knowing it was a lie. The next day, Friday, was the reading of the will. We all gathered in the formal living room, the air thick with anticipation. Mr. Henderson, Grandpa Henry's lawyer, a portly man with a neatly trimmed beard, sat at the mahogany table, a stack of papers in front of him. He cleared his throat and began to read the will, his voice droning on about various bequests to charities and distant relatives. Then he got to the part we were all waiting for. "To my beloved son, Richard, I leave the sum of $100,000. My dad's face remained impassive, but I saw a slight tightening around his jaw. "To my dear daughter, Sarah, I leave the sum of $100,000. Sarah offered a polite nod. "To my grandson, Benjamin, I leave the sum of $100,000. Ben looked surprised, a small smile playing on his lips. Then came my name. "To my grandson, Ethan, whom I have always loved despite our differences, I leave my entire estate, including the house, the lake cabin, all investments, and personal property." A stunned silence filled the room. My jaw dropped. My parents' faces were masks of disbelief and anger. Sarah's eyes widened, and Ben looked like he might faint. "There must be some mistake," my dad finally sputtered, his face turning red. This can't be right." Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses. "I assure you, Richard, there is no mistake. These are Mr. Carter's explicit instructions." My mom's carefully constructed composure crumbled. But why, Henry? Why would you do this?" she wailed, tears welling up in her eyes. Mr. Henderson simply shrugged. Mr. Carter did not elaborate on his reasons in the will. I was still reeling from the shock. The entire estate. Grandpa Henry was a wealthy man. This was life-changing. My dad stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "This is outrageous. Ethan hasn't even been a part of this family for years. He doesn't deserve this." "Richard, please," Sarah said, trying to calm him down. "No, Sarah, this isn't fair. We've always been here for him. We've always done what he wanted." Except when it came to me, I couldn't help but interject, my voice surprisingly calm despite the turmoil inside me. My mom rounded on me, her face contorted with fury. "This is your fault, Ethan. You probably manipulated him somehow. You always were a selfish child." "Mom," Ben finally spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. "That's not fair." "Shut up, Ben," she snapped. The room erupted into chaos. My parents were yelling, Sarah was trying to mediate, and Ben looked like he wanted to disappear. I just stood there, watching them, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. This was them. This was the family I had tried to escape. And nothing had changed. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat again, trying to regain control. "There is one more thing," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Mr. Carter also left a personal letter for Ethan." He handed me a thick envelope with my name written on it in Grandpa Henry's shaky handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I took it. "We'll leave you to read it in private, Ethan," Mr. Henderson said, standing up. "I'll be in touch regarding the estate." He quickly made his exit, clearly wanting no part of the Miller family drama. As soon as the lawyer was gone, my parents turned back to me, their eyes filled with a mixture of anger and desperation. "What does it say, Ethan?" my dad demanded. "What did he say?" I looked at the envelope in my hand, then back at my family. Their true colors were on full display, their greed and resentment laid bare. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. "It's none of your business," I said, my voice firm. "I think it's time for me to go." I turned and walked out of the living room, out of their house, and out of their lives. Ben followed me to the door, a hesitant look on his face. "Ethan, wait," he said softly. I'm sorry about all this." "It's not your fault, Ben," I said, offering him a small, sad smile. "Just take care of yourself." I walked out into the crisp autumn air, the letter from Grandpa Henry clutched in my hand. I didn't open it until I was back at the airport, waiting for my flight. The letter was written in Grandpa's familiar scrawl, the words slightly shaky but full of his characteristic bluntness. "Ethan," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I've finally kicked the bucket. Sorry you had to come back for this circus. Your parents and siblings, well, you know how they are. Always chasing the dollar, always worried about appearances. I haven't been blind, Ethan. I saw how they treated you, how they pushed you away for wanting to live your own life. It wasn't right. You're a good kid, Ethan, always have been. You've got a good heart and you work hard. That's more than I can say for the rest of them. The truth is, Ethan, I was ashamed of how my family treated you. They value money and status over everything else, including their own son. I wanted to make things right in my own way. That's why I left everything to you. You deserve it. Build your life, Ethan. Live it on your own terms. And don't let them ever make you feel like you're not good enough. There's a cabin up at the lake. It's where your grandma and I used to go to get away from all the noise. It's got a great view. Maybe you can go up there sometime. Do some of that woodworking you're so fond of. Take care of yourself, kid. Love, Grandpa Henry. Tears streamed down my face as I finished reading the letter. Grandpa Henry had seen me. He had understood. And he had, in his own way, given me the validation I had longed for all my life. As the plane took off, soaring above the lights of Charlotte, I looked down at the city that had once been my home. I was leaving it behind again, but this time it was different. This time I wasn't leaving with a sense of rejection and hurt. I was leaving with a sense of closure, of validation, and a newfound sense of freedom. I still had a lot to process. The inheritance was overwhelming, and the realization of my family's true nature was still sinking in. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let their greed and negativity poison my life anymore. I thought about Clara, about Gus, about my little workshop in Denver. That was my real family now, the people who loved and accepted me for who I was. The lake cabin, Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Maybe I would go there sometime. Maybe I would finally build that piece of furniture I'd always dreamed of, overlooking the water, surrounded by the peace and quiet that had always eluded me in Charlotte.